The Village, M. Night Shyamalan's first critical failure. A movie inaccurately marketed as a horror film with Blair Witch scenic callbacks. A movie derided for its overly predictable twists that everyone supposedly could see coming if you saw his earlier movies. In contradiction to this point, audiences hated it for unpredictably being lied to about what kind of movie they were getting. But therein lies the issue. The Village is rarely critiqued for what it is, but rather what it is not. It is not horror, not really, so it is hated. It is not The Sixth Sense or Unbreakable, so it is hated. But simultaneously, it is definitely not an example of the truly wretched Shyamalan films that would become the norm until Split crashed in to remind us that this was indeed a director with genuine ability. So what is it? For the rest of the video, I'm going to talk about the film as if everyone already knows the twists. It is how I watched it. It is honestly how I believe many should reapproach the film, because in the end, the shock value of the twists is really not all that important. After all, I watched The Sixth Sense the first time similarly spoiled, and I actually was able to enjoy picking up details I likely would have missed on a blind first watch. If spoilers ruin a movie, then is the movie that good to begin with? So here goes. The Village is an anachronistic, LARPy isolated community in modern day. Bam! The monsters are not real, but a fabricated theatric by the elders in order to keep everyone in the village. Kapow! Moving on now. The film opens with a burial. The burial of a small child. A small child born within a village which we learn later was built specifically to escape the tragedies and death of the outside world. As we watch Brendan Gleeson weep for the loss of his son, we are given the hints, far more obvious on a rewatch, that his character's faith is shattered, that everything he was running from has returned to haunt him. Brendan Gleeson's character, though seemingly secondary, expands the main point of the story as the film continues, from conversation with Phoenix's character to his blatant statement of the film's thesis in a later scene with the elders. We cannot run from heartache. My brother was slain in the towns. The rest of my family died here. Heartache is part of life. We know that now. The very premise upon which the village was built has utterly failed. Gleeson's character is the first to see this, having experienced it firsthand. Adding to the tragedy is that the very conditions with which the elders constructed the village has led to some of the deaths. Lack of modern medicine being a primary reason for wounds and diseases becoming fatal or near fatal. They built the village as an anachronistic LARP of late 19th century living in order to escape past grief. But in doing so, they have sowed the seeds of future tragedies. The disease the child died of was almost assuredly curable. Joaquin Phoenix's character's wound is treatable with medicines and tools they lack. Even Noah, played by Adrian Brody with a far more accurate representation of neurodivergence than some examples I could mention, might have had the access to mental health treatment or behavioral therapy. Perhaps he would have hurt people all the same or required being committed in some institution, but that's precisely the point. Heartbreak and tragedy is an unavoidable part of life. Now, some might consider this decision of the elders ludicrous and unrealistic, a complete lack of common sense on the part of the characters, or a fabrication of extremely artificial script writing. But I would posit to you, is it really though? If you believe this is unrealistic, at this point, I would like to ask you if you have had any experience with people raised in cult or cult-like environs. Believe it or not, this sort of contradictory and self-fulfilling thinking is quite common in communities or groups that willingly cut themselves off from the world. To use an example, let's consider people who avoid proven and undeniably effective vaccinations. If one ever bothers to talk to these people, one might be surprised to find that not all of them fit the screaming, Luddite, technophobic, homeopathic, pseudo-scientific stereotype. A great many are regular human beings who are rational in most other aspects of life. Thus, to someone meeting them the first time, it can be perplexing. Perplexing that someone so reasonable can deny something so obvious. In my experience, such people usually swore off vaccinations because they first or second-hand witnessed a vaccination horror story, which I would remind you can happen, allergies and whatnot, and so they decided to run in the other direction. Think of it like someone who was once bitten by a dog and now fears your golden retriever no matter how much you assure him that your good boy won't bite him. The tragedy of the matter is that a disease like, say, measles or mumps then becomes catchable. By trying to run from one potential tragedy, the parent throws their child into another one. By refusing to accept that tragedy could happen, they run from risk, and as a result run into the arms of an even greater risk. Another applicable comparison, and truthfully, the first that came to my mind during the watch, is in the realm of homeschooling. And I would point out I am not casting a net over all homeschooling parents in this. There are many good examples of parents who have pulled their children out of the dysfunctional system for good reasons, and who gave them a better education than could have otherwise been provided. No. I am referring to a subclass of homeschoolers, who homeschool specifically to avoid, and I quote, the bad things that I saw in public school, the sex, the drugs, the things I'm trying to protect you from, blah blah blah, etc., unquote. The stupidity of this kind of homeschooling, in my experience, is that it almost always results in young adults who are practically begging to be preyed upon, ignorant of the real world and unprepared to handle basic aspects of life. Usually these homeschoolers do not replace the time that would be wasted in proms and other such stupidity with more time studying or some rustic outdoorsy life skills. Instead, they grow up usually to be stunted adults with huge gaps in their knowledge and skills. Basic white 20-somethings who still haven't outgrown VeggieTales, as one person put it. The parents in the village have done exactly this. They have, out of a genuine desire to protect their children, harmed them in myriad ways. From little things like Kitty being unable to court a boy correctly, which is probably the most on-the-nose portrayal of sheltered homeschooled social skills, all the way to Ivy's preventable blindness, a blindness that motivates her into overcoming any limitations set before her, a blindness that guilts her father into permitting her to leave the village. Brendan Gleeson's character is the first to come to this realization, cradling his dead little boy in the opening scene and spending the rest of the film reflecting on the failure of their little experiment. The village, when looked at through these lenses, becomes a critique of those who seek to run from the harshness of reality instead of confronting it head-on. From over-sheltering homeschooling parents to parents who spray sanitizer on their children's hand until they are dried and cracked, to reactionaries of all political stripes who want to ban books and films that make them feel uncomfortable. The world is full of parents and authority figures who try so hard to make others safe, but whose machinations only stunt those who they seek to protect. The child who is allowed to eat mud, scrape his knee in a bicycle accident, and learn how to safely start a fire will be far better off in life than the child who was bathed in hand sanitizer, was never allowed to ride bicycles, and handed a Nintendo device so he wouldn't try to learn how to cook and thus burn himself with fire. You cannot eliminate tragedy, heartbreak, or the bad, uncomfortable things from life. You cannot live safely in a bubble. Eventually these things will find you, and you must be ready to meet them. Overall, I do have one or two gripes with the movie plot-wise, but they are not enough to entirely mar it for me. It's certainly a lesser film than Split, Sixth Sense, or Unbreakable, but I consider it still good overall. It's an odd class among M. Night's filmography, neither in the excellent category of the aforementioned three, nor the awful category of, well, the next 10 years of his work. It's in a territory shared with Glass and probably Signs, which I would point out is a movie I need to reevaluate at some point. I'd rate it a 7 out of 10. ERP plus, 3 stars out of 4, you get the idea. I do not expect everyone who watches the film to appreciate it as much as I do, but I still recommend that you give it a chance. Throw aside your preconceived notions, memes, parroted slogans, and let the film have its chance with a clean slate. You might still dislike it, but at least you will dislike it for what it is, instead of what it isn't. Who knows, you might even grow a fondness for it as I have. At the very least, there's the soundtrack. Holy hell, what a soundtrack. Hate the movie if that is genuinely how you feel, but this soundtrack is untouchable. The Village. M. Night Shyamalan's